All right, thank you for stopping by and maybe listening to this video. And of course, any support is greatly welcome and appreciated if you maybe get some kind of value out of it. And just trying to cover a few key points and even some exercises, if you will, that I would say, like for me, that I personally experienced, would say it made the most difference in terms of actually getting any kind of improvement out of my eyes, specifically with myopia, nearsightedness, right? Nearsightedness, right? And I think a lot of people will underestimate it. And you might even tag a friend or like share with a friend that has nearsightedness. Maybe they want to maybe check out some of this. That I don't claim to be the absolute best. I'm not an optometrist or ophthalmologist. I don't claim to have a degree in eye anything related to the eyes. I'm just giving personal layman's perspective, right? So proceed with any of that what I'm doing with your own caution and best judgment. I wouldn't say I'm probably not doing anything dangerous. I'm just, mostly talking about like the Bates method, right? And I think if anybody is watching this video, if you're familiar with the Bates method, it talks about generally natural methods for improving your vision, right? Basically getting your eyes to see clearer naturally. And there's a few different things that I've seen in terms of exercises they talk about. I think if you've seen any of it, you're familiar with at least some of them, like things like palming and sunning and, relaxed swinging of the arms and so forth. Different things to, seen people talk about different kinds of exercises. So I'm not here to say anything negative about any of those. I think a lot of those could have various values, but I'm talking about specific things that I noticed seem to be most effective for getting the eye to actually focus clearly, right? And some extra notes about it, like just a few of the key things that I would say that helped me to actually see more clearly, specifically with my right eye, because this is a lot of things that I think, aren't maybe covered in a lot of other maybe videos, lessons, or talks about it, but I would say you want to really, train each eye independently or test each eye independently, right? Really try to get each eye to focus independently, right? Maybe your worst eye, maybe first or primarily, because, and this is just my experience, it seems to, maybe tell me if you have the same experiences, right? Or maybe you notice something different with your vision. But, from my experience, even with both eyes, maybe you have one better eye than the other with certain distances, like, for me, my right eye is more nearsighted, my left eye is more farsighted, right? So I can actually see closer much better with my right eye, even though my vision at a distance is not so great, right? So it could be pretty bad potentially. Now, I kind of feel like I'm noticing an improvement from doing some of these exercises. I feel like are most in line with the Bates method. I don't claim that they're all talked about in the Bates method, or at least the same way. But, exercises to get you to focus your eye. I think some of it's part relaxation, right? But I think it's, like I said, focusing your eye independently. Now, let's say if I take my right eye, the most myopic eye, and I try to look into the distance, I notice it's blurry, right? And I want to get it to be clear and crisp so I can see definition, right? And, clear lines and so forth, be able to read something at a distance, right? So, I want to be able to take each eye independently and be able to do those things, right? So that's one factor. There's, now with your, and what should I say is like, I'm kind of rambling here. I'll go off on some offshoots. So you have to understand it's kind of conversational. It's not necessarily, right over just 10 key points, like, a highly planned video. It's more about some of the key things that I would say I just noticed from a session, for example. With your right eye, for example, maybe it's weaker than the left eye, and that's just an example, but my experience is that when the vision from both eyes together is typically, when you're looking with both eyes, it's typically going to be a better image than with either eye independently. And that might be non-intuitive in a certain sense. You might think, oh, well, if you're just using your better eye, how is the worse eye helping to make your vision better at some distances or whatever, right? But it seems to be an aggregate, right? Your brain is aggregating the information from both eyes to make an even better overall perception or image. So that with both eyes. So, can you get each eye to operate well independently, right? There's a few factors here like depth to perception. You're not triangulating. You're only using one eye, right? And eye fatigue and strain. With this focus method, or methods, approaches, a few key things. The key really is to relax your eyes into focus, right? Not really doing it with your eyes, both eyes, but really just one eye, covering the other eye, right? And like covering that so you can isolate this eye. Now, when I say isolate it too, I mean not just covering the eye, but really thinking about just seeing out of the one eye. Like, we can be mentally kind of in the mindset of looking out of both eyes, even though we have this eye covered. But if we kind of take it more of it, it'd be like as if we're really closing this eye and we're just really using this as our dominant eye or our main. We're just really just trying to look through it as if it's our a cyclops or something practically, right? So that's one factor to trying to get an isolated maybe operation of that eye, maybe in one sense, right? So that's a kind of a thing you have to kind of feel for yourself. Am I looking from both eyes, even though my eye is covered or closed, or am I kind of just thinking more like I'm just looking from the one eye, right? So I think that's a factor. Now, there's this other thing that's called central fixation. I think a lot of people have talked about. Now, and what they seem to be talking about seems like it's a little bit different from what I'm saying, right? Now, I talk about central fixation. Maybe I'm not talking about the same thing that they're talking about, but I think about it kind of like the same thing, right? Central fixation. Now, this is, when you're looking in the distance with your myopic or nearsighted eye, it's pretty blurry. The main thing is it's not necessarily, in my experience, it's not so much about the distance. It's more about the size of the object you're looking at, right? In relation to your eye. If it's a mountain, it's way in the distance, 20 miles away, it looks tiny, or part of it looks tiny, right? So it's not necessarily so much about the distance, it's about being able to see the detail and the size of an object more like it. So we perceive it to be about distance because, if you're looking at a huge object, even though it's in the distance, you perceive it as a large object, than a mountain or, a big vehicle or whatever it is. But, the central fixation, now, I'm not talking about just like the point of focus for your eye. Like whatever you're looking at, like I'm looking at my hand is right here. This would be maybe my central fixation, and then things that are around could be in my field of view aren't really part of that main centrally fixated object where I'm looking at, right? That's maybe something else what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like centralized focus or almost pixelated focus. Now I don't claim to know what the max resolution the human eye sees at, right? But obviously, pretty high. Like I don't know if we can tell the difference within an 8K, 16K monitors or something like that. Can you even tell the pixel? The size of the pixels are so small at that point, right? Maybe your eye has some kind of limitation on the pixelization that it picks up, right? So, in that sense, I don't know. Maybe some people, you hallucinate, and your eyes could operate differently based on signals to the brain, or maybe some factors in the way the nerves are working, right? But this central fixation, this point of fixation, what I'm talking about is like almost, and it's an infinitesimal, like you're looking at an object far away and you're trying to see one of the smallest points of that object. And I mean like very small, because it's so blurry, right? It takes time for it to, like your eye's trying to focus. Your eye wants to focus at that level, but it's like stuck. It's stiff. It's calcified, oxalated, maybe. Who knows? Some combination of factors could be causing your myopia to not work. I don't claim to know. I didn't look up every element of what causes myopia, right? Maybe it's genetic. There's different factors that might come into play, right? But the idea is to get that eye to focus at that distance and to be able to see definition, right? Maybe you can get it to kind of focus. Maybe you're looking at a mountain in the distance, right? And you can't really see much, but it's just a green haze or a brown haze. But if you were to get maybe you look at through your good eye, you can see a bit more texture, definition, striations, or cracks in the rocks, or ridge lines, stuff like that. At the top of the mountain ridge line, you can see clearer definition with your better eye at a distance, right? But your worse eye just sees kind of, mushy edges, doesn't really see much definition. So the idea there is to focus on very small, tiny points, like the very tip of a tree, or two different shades of colors where there's a clear contrast line. Maybe there's a straight type of line, looking at a building or something like that, and you can see two different colors, and you want to be able to really see the clear line or break between them, whatever. Maybe it's not a line, maybe it's a crack, or maybe it's a ridge or something. It's just different shapes or whatever. You want to be able to see that clearly from a distance. So the idea is to focus on the smallest, tiniest elements of it, and I mean tiny. I mean, like, trying to identify the sharp corners or edges of a license plate on a car that's like 300 yards away, right? And maybe you close your one eye and you're looking at it with your worst eye, and it's rather blurry. You just can't really distinguish much of it. You don't even know what you're looking at, right? Maybe there's a couple of cars in the parking lot, but all you know is there's a couple of cars. You can't tell what kind of cars, whatever it is, right? Now the idea here is to be very patient, right, and understand this takes time, right? This ain't something that you just sit there and do for 5 minutes a day. This is something that you want to sit down and you spend 10, 20, 30 minutes, maybe up to an hour, just going on and off for a little while. Maybe doing a little bit daily in the beginning, not doing too much per se, trying to exercise a little bit daily, make a little improvement. But you don't want to overstrain these muscles in your eye necessarily right from the get-go, but you want to give them a good workout, right? And so the idea is like focusing on very tiny points, right? So when you're looking at the distance, now in the beginning you may have a hard time even distinguishing a fine point of anything because it's blurry, right? But you just keep kind of just your eye on the same object. Let it relax. Notice that you're getting maybe glare or blur, right? And I'm not claiming it's going to work for everybody. Maybe there's different issues with your eye. Maybe you have cataract, some other factors to consider. Maybe you have some other problem. Maybe you had some injury with your eye. I don't know, but I'm just claiming for more for most people with traditional myopia that could be pretty bad, right? You see most things in the distance you can't read. Signs you'd have a hard time reading, for example, right? So, like you said, isolating that worst side. And let me say the worst side because I think you'll notice that if you do notice some little improvement in getting that eye to focus, even just a drop better than it did before, that your main vision with both eyes open will feel crisper and maybe even actually improve, right? Maybe actually improve. So the idea is this central fixation. Or actually, I take that back. I don't want to call it centralized fixation because I think that's what other people would refer to something else as, like I was talking about. This is something else. I don't know if other people talk about the specific thing as much, but I think a few people have. Like I said, the idea is to focus on a very small point. So in the beginning, just getting it to come into any degree of better focus is a step up, right? Like I said, this takes time to let your lens focus. I think this is what happens with a lot of people trying to say, oh, I can't do it because they at first it just seems like it'll never improve. It'll be like you keep looking at it. They're not giving it enough time in a session to sit there and just look at the one thing they're trying to look at. Maybe it's the side of a book, the title of a book that they can't really read with their eye, and it's blurry, right? If you look at that book for a while with that one eye, just trying to just not necessarily strain, maybe do a couple of things where you feel like you're trying to help your eye focus in terms of twitching or whatever you might do with your eye, but mainly going back to mostly just letting it relax and even intentionally relax and just stare at it, right? Stare at the side of the book. Now, at the beginning it seemed like maybe it's not really making much of an improvement. Maybe you make it feel like it's doing a slight something. You see a little bit more color contrast than what you're looking at or something. Slightly more clear, right? Maybe if you have pretty bad myopia, I'm sure you would see that it's hard to get much of an improvement, right? So, but like I said, giving it some time, 5 minutes of just straight looking at one thing gently, not trying to strain to look per se, not squinting, right? Not doing anything that you feel is straining, but rather just relaxing and observing and looking at it. Maybe open your eye good to try to let light and oxygen in, whatever, but mainly just relaxed fixation, if you will, right, on one object, trying to see if it comes into a slightly better clarity. But then you're going to step it up and you're going to try to look at a smaller part of the object, right? Maybe one letter in the title that you can't read it necessarily. Maybe you can just identify it. Maybe you open your good eye and you can take a look and see what it looks like. You know, like close the bad eye and look through the good eye and see how it looks. And maybe it looks better, and then you can go back. But maybe you're really just trying to see if you can get any clarity out of your weaker eye, whatever it is for that distance, right? So now, like I said, focusing on something small, like a letter, that's one step, right? But then even getting, even further down to like, the circle inside of an O, or the dark part of the letter as opposed to the light part, and noticing if you're able to really see any edges at all, any clarity or definition of the edges of any of those letters. Now, if you can't, this is where, like I said, you got to really give this time. It's easy to underestimate it. It's easy to give up easily and think, oh, this just ain't working, right? But to focus on even smaller points, like the very edge of the book, the best you can, right? Just trying to look at that to allow the edge to come into any level of greater view, right? Greater clarity. Just relaxed, staring right at the edge of maybe the book, right? Maybe it's a round object like a cup or a large vase or something like that, and you're looking at it. Maybe you can see in the front of it, it's kind of blurry, and towards the edges, you can see the edges blurry, and you can't really see as it's going around. That's another good thing to just try to look at is the side of a large vase that's at a distance, right? It's, the edge of it might be blurry, and then you can also see how the depth is changing as it's curving around, right? Maybe you'll notice if you're looking right towards the edge of the object and the surface of the object, right near the visual edge of it, it's like it gets even blurrier right there, right? So your idea is you want to get that into clear view, right? By just staring at it, not necessarily staring, but letting your eye just look at it, right? Just letting it be there in front of your eyes, and just gently kind of looking around it, trying to pick up any additional information, trying to see if the blur gradually decreases at all a little bit. I think you'll find if you give this a good amount of time, do it a few times, and sit there sometimes just for a little while, like 10 minutes or so, just trying to look at one part, the edge of the object, right? The very edge of the object. Ideally with some good lighting. If you're in low light, it's going to be harder, right, to identify edges and stuff like that. So give yourself some good lighting, especially in the beginning of these exercises, right? So the main thing is, like I said, focusing on very small things, and this could be the letters on the words of the screen, right? You could be looking at your computer screen, and you could look at it from a distance where it's a little too blurry to read, right? Just sit there and really try to focus. And as blurry as the word looks, you can't read it at all, right? Try to just look at what looks like maybe one letter or the very beginning of the word, which would be a pretty small point, right? At a distance, a small word on the screen, just trying to look at the one letter, and just trying to see if you can just gently, look around that letter, but kind of also focusing on just one single point. And it's easy to get distracted from it when you're trying to focus on one single tiny point, right? It's easy to get distracted. Your eye wants to move around. You're, oh, well, let me look around here. It's easy to think that, maybe if I just look around this area really good, my eye will come into focus. And that's not what I'm talking about. No, you need to be still for this, right? You're probably going to need to be really still, basically completely still for this to work, right? And you're looking at a very tiny point, mainly at a distance or something that's small on a screen at a few feet away, and just letting your eye relax it into a little bit clearer vision gradually, right? Now, eventually you can get it almost to where it's really pretty clear vision if this is just like genuine myopia, I believe, right? But, the thing is it takes a bit of time to get it like totally there. Maybe it's getting clearer. It seems like it's kind of clear, but it's not fully there. You keep just looking at that distance and looking at the small points in that scene, whatever the screen of your computer, or a bookshelf in the distance on the wall, or the edge of a door or something like that, right? So you're looking at it long enough for it to just achieve any greater level of natural focus, right? By looking at it for a while, because what we want to recognize that our eye lens is trying to focus, right? It's trying to get to that point. It's trying to see the item, the objects, right? But it's atrophied, right? It's very weak. It's got maybe some calcification or stiffness to it that's keeping it from moving quickly. But it is trying to move. It's trying to expand or contract or whatever, right? So you sit there and just give it time, looking at one distance, one object, one small point of the object. Maybe move your head around a little bit. Also, some gentle blinking, right, to maybe help you achieve a slightly better focus, slightly different. You get start maybe make it feel a little clearer after you blink sometimes, right? Now, so this is a big deal, right? Good length of time, gentle, like gentle staring, if you will. Relaxed, if you will. This is important to relax, because you want your eye to focus naturally, right? And think about how it is with your good eye. That does better, right? How it can go from far to close. So that's one thing, right? Another thing is this depth shifting, looking at something close and something far, and trying to focus in on something close here, and then go back to the distant thing you're looking at, right? That's another thing. But I don't think that really stretches your eye to really see something at a distance or small clearly the way this pixelated fixation that I'm talking about, where you look at the tiniest point of something, right? And like let's say you're looking at a building, a couple hundred yards away, or a few hundred yards away, and there's the edge of the building, right? Can you see the edge of the building clearly, or is there glare? Is it pretty blurry, right? Can you see the side of the building? Can you see the texture, any cracks or lines with that eye? Maybe you can't. Maybe you're just looking at it, it's kind of pretty blurry. You can see the color, generally speaking. You can see where the edge is at, but it's pretty blurry. You can't really see a good defined edge. Well, stare at that edge. And I mean stare right at the very edge of that building. Maybe it's tiny, maybe it's the top of a building and there's a steeple or something like that, right? And you're looking at the edge of it and you see it's pretty blurry. It's hard to really see much definition. But I mean, like I said, looking right at the very edge of it. Maybe just, if anything, just a drop towards the surface of the building, because you're trying to get your eye to identify the details of that very edge of that building, right? And even the textures of the building, whether the paint or whatever it is best you can, right? Maybe it depends how distant it is, and but the idea is you want your eye to come into full focus, right? So you're looking at this very tiny part of something that's in the distance, or you're looking at a very tiny part of the computer screen, maybe the time on the bottom right, and the time and date on the bottom right of your computer screen from 6 feet or something. Maybe it's too blurry to see. Just sit there and gently just try to look at it. Try to look at one number, what you think is one number in it. Don't try to strain, but try to imagine it just kind of gradually, slowly coming into slightly better view, right? And like I say, if you stare at the same thing long enough at that distance, trying to get a little bit of slightly better focus, I think you'll find that it will come into at least a little bit better focus each time you do it, right? And if you really max it out and you stay there for a while really looking at that one thing, that's where you can read those sentences on the screen maybe that you couldn't read. Maybe it's still, can you read it with your other eye? If you can read it with your other eye, then you should be able to read it with that eye. Maybe it's still tough with the other eye, then maybe it's a little too far for either eye, right? Either way, then the main thing is to improve your worst eye at least a little bit, right? To overall improve your main vision, right? And help reduce the atrophy of that eye, lazy eye, or whatever might be causing it. Maybe it's genetic, and I think there's some factors in there that could make it almost impossible to get to, maybe it won't, you can't, I'm not saying you can cure your myopia. What I'm saying is maybe you can create some even slightly lasting effect to help improve your vision, right, in some way, right? I'm not saying there's going to be any permanent, that you can cure myopia, I'm not claiming that, right? But I am claiming that I can get my myopic eye into full clarity. Right? I can get it into full clarity with these a couple of things. Right now, another thing too is they talk about palming with the Bates method. Now, what I'm more specifically talking about is when you're trying to focus on something that's either in the distance or it's small, right? And you're trying to get your eye to see it clearly. What we want to do is, let me turn this down just a little bit. What we want to do is maybe take the hand and just gently just put it right over the eye, not like trying to press down and trying to, you don't want to like mess up what you're seeing, but putting it over the eye, and then just for a few seconds, 5 seconds or so, and then removing it to see what you were looking at. Maybe, your eye relaxes, lets the lens relax for a moment, and then it puts it back through a repetition of trying to see clearly at that distance, or whatever that object is. And like I said, not so much about the distance, maybe it's a factor. I mean, that's how we perceive it, but really it's more about the size, right? It's more about the size and being able to see the definition of that object at that size. You're seeing a mountain way in the distance. Can you see any ridge lines and stuff like that? You're seeing the clock on your screen. Can you read it and distinguish the numbers or the date? Right? Those factors more, I think, about the size of the object, right? So, getting your lens to focus on something that's rather detailed, right? Relatively detailed. So, like I said, now this is another thing too. Is what's a good thing to try to see if you could see, right? Maybe like cords or cables or strands of something that you can see with your good eye, but when you put your nearsighted eye, it's so blurry you can't even see it. It's just a thin strand of something. Maybe it's a cable or a cord, right, from a lamp or something like that. And at a distance, with your nearsighted eye, with your good eye, you can see it fine. You can see it's pretty distinct, pretty clear, right? It's clear, but your weak eye is much less clear. Even to the point where if you're just looking at a cord hanging, you can't even see it. Maybe at a distance it's just too thin, but it's also out of focus to the point where it's just too blurry and you can't even actually really hardly see it. Maybe you can see some glint of ghosting. Right? You can see it's like it's there's something there, but your eye's just not in focus there. And maybe there's a few strands or a few cords, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 cords in a bundle or something like that, and you can't really see them very distinctly because your eye is blurry. There's another thing I noticed, which actually it took me a while to notice, was that it seemed to be, for me at least, a horizontal aberration or issue, where if I can't see some distinct line like between the crack of a door, I can't see the darkness between the crack of a door because it's too blurry, it's too mushed up, or for whatever reason I can't see it with this eye. But I can see it with the other eye, right, clearly. But with this eye, the right eye, can't see it clearly. But then if I turn my head to the side, it is clear. I can see the dark gap between the door, right? This is one example. It's clear. I can maybe read the title of a book that I couldn't read with my head straight up. So it seems to have an angular effect in my case. Maybe you discovered that. Let me know. Leave me a comment on what your discoveries are. Or if you apply any of these, what I'm talking about here, you try to do some of this central point focus. I would say just central point, but tiny point focus, right? Like I said, trying to notice the edges or even the corner distinctly of a license plate of a car that's 200 yards away or something. It's a couple parking lots away, and you can barely see the car is pretty small itself, and you're just trying to see if you can recognize any additional definition or detail that you might not previously, because your eyes coming into slightly better focus. You're focusing on a tiny point and just keeping it fixated there for a while, gently, not trying to like strain to focus per se, but just keeping it fixated right at that one point, tiniest point, without your eye, without moving around to look at other points around it, right? Because that's what will distract your eye from coming into this focus if we move around. You want to keep on one single point, one tiny point or edge or contrast line, right? And just stay looking at it. Just maybe move your head around a little bit, maybe do a few light blinkings, but generally speaking, looking at that point for a while, right, with a certain type of concentration and focus until that lens, you see it's trying to work. Right? It's trying to work. It's trying to come into focus. Then maybe you get really kind of good at this, and eventually you get to where it's like, wow, I can see that wall clearly. I can see those books clearly right now with my poor eye. Because you've been sitting there for a while, you've been focusing on a book title, you've been focusing on the crack in the door, you've maybe turned your head at the side, noticing some elements of your vision that you're getting more accustomed to what's going on with that eye, what helps it to see better and not see so well. It's helping you to learn your vision a little bit better, right? But maybe you get to the point where, wait a minute, I can kind of see that whole area a bit better, maybe a bit better, and your eye actually gets to the point where it's actually focused at that level of detail for that depth, where you can see, much more detail, generally speaking. But maybe it's still hazy in a lot of ways. Maybe it's much clearer, but it's not perfect, or maybe your eye's like trying to get to the point where it's focused at that point, but it's not fully there, and it needs to get locked into that particular depth. It needs to, you keep working, at that level. So at the same time, the first few times doing this, try not to strain your eye too much. Maybe you might even get a headache the first time you're trying some of this, because it might be like, wow, trying to get my myopic eye to see is like, wow, this feels weird, because you never really tried it before. It might be a strain, so just maybe a little bit at a time. The first time you're doing this, do a session of, 10, 20 minutes, trying to, isolate your eye, trying to see if you can get it to, like isolate your eye in terms of mentally saying, wait, I'm just seeing out this eye right now. I'm not trying to look out this eye, pretending this doesn't even exist. I'm like just trying to think about this eye. And I'm using this eye independently as my dominant eye, my only eye. Not just trying to use it haphazardly. I'm trying to get it to function better. Trying to get it to exercise and function better. Like as if it's the only eye I have all of a sudden I need to be able to read and do stuff that I can't normally do because all of a sudden I don't have my good eye. Right? How would you treat that? How would you do? You try to get, maybe you try to get good at it, right? You practice and so forth and get your eye. Maybe they say that people who have eye charts in their homes typically have less eye impairments or vision problems, right? Maybe that's a good idea to get one, right? If you're trying to fix your vision. But if you think about it, you probably use a bit of other stuff the same way, like your computer screen or looking at a book or something. Now, so these are just a few factors, right? Like I said, this gentle putting your hand on your eye for a few seconds and then looking back at the object at the distance. Maybe see if it relaxes your lens, and then it makes it go back from just a relaxed state to a degree to just looking right at the object, and see if it tries to bring it into, maybe a little better focus, or, you do that a few times, right? So you're doing this, and you're looking at an object, and maybe, do it a little slower. Give your eye some time to see if it focuses on the object or a word on, a bottle or a book or something like that. So these are a few things that I gently doing that. This is what I found helped me when I was able to see better some cords that are hanging down, some thin cables from a lamp, right? That I'm looking this straight up like this. Now, if I look to the side, just like the door crack, I can see the cables all clear with this eye. It's weird, right? So it's like as if it's a horizontal aberration that is not really affecting on the vertical. It's more affecting on the horizontal. So if I turn this way, all of a sudden I can see the cables clearly. But can I get to where I can see the cables clearly with my head just straight up? That's what I would like to do, right? So the cables are very thin, and they're at a distance, and just looking straight up with my eye without really getting it to focus at all, it's hard to really see the cables. It's just, like I said, some ghosting in there. So what I want to do is try to see if I can get my eye to focus on where the actual cable or cord is at that is hanging from the lamp. I want to try to see if I can just gently focus on it. Maybe I can get some glint of a little bit of a dark line to see any of it, right? Maybe I can see somewhere the dark line on the end of the cord, but I can't see. All of a sudden it disappears through some portion of, how for the cable, right? So, my idea there is, like I said, to do some central focusing on some points of some other objects to where I get a little bit greater focus, and then I'll go back and look at the cable and say, well, maybe can I see the cable a little bit better now? And maybe I can see the book title a little clearer that I was just looking at by doing some of this central fixation on one letter, or even the tiniest point of a letter, or looking at a word that's there that's really blurry and just not moving your eye around, but trying to focus on that one word, and even just one tiny part of the word, one tiny letter in the word, one part of the letter, even depending on how small it is to your eye from that distance. But doing that to try to get a little bit better focus, so I can go back and look at the chords and see if I can actually see some of the chords. And I've been able to achieve a bit of results with that. Once I see those chords, that's like the ultimate test almost, right? If I can see those thin chords, that's like, oh, wow, I'm in focus, right? But there's also, it's creating some certain lighting effects. Like I said, it's ghosting, kind of like you can see something's there, but it's just these cables are really thin. You can't really get your eye right on them. It's partly about maybe depth perception, getting your eye to say, wait a minute, I can get my eye to understand where that's actually located, so I can get it to fixate on it. Like it's 6 feet away or 8 feet away, you're having a little bit more of a challenge with your depth perception with just one eye, right? Another thing is like maybe there's just a piece of dust or a pebble or something underneath the lighting of a lamp on a table, right? And you can see it from a distance, and maybe you look at it up close with your poor eye, and you can see the object fairly well because you're up close. But as you back up from it, you notice it starts elongating, or there's a glare that's created when you're staring at that item, right? Or that maybe it's a white object that's reflecting light really well, right? Or something like that. And so when you're looking at it, as you get a little further from it, you notice that it's even elongating, like maybe it's a round object, and then it gets a little bit longer because there's glare coming off of it. A little bit of glare, right? Maybe as you get further, it gets even longer. What you want to do is get it to where there's no glare. You don't want to stare into a real bright light, but let's just say there's some low LED lights on a lamp, or a digital thing or something like that. Right now, can you get it to where you can look at it and just see the sharpness of those letters or numbers or whatever it is without glare, right? And maybe a double vision, if you will, right? Just focusing on it, central focus on the one thing, the edge of it, right? Not necessarily with a strain, but a relaxed setting in to allow your lens to gently just relax into focus, so that the involuntary muscles of your eye are trying to work to gently, gradually, slowly, maybe bring your eye into a little bit better focus. Right? Ideally, you get that working real fast. It'd be responsive like your other eye seems to be, or it sees at a distance quickly. It's more unconscious. But until then, you kind of just, and that's what you want it to be. You want it to be unconscious, like you're looking at something. You want your lens to just kind of naturally try to focus in on it the best you can. But like I said, to get this fine-tuned focus, maybe you can see the object there. But to get rid of the blurriness and to get good crisp vision, like you said, the central fixating on a very tiny point, I would say, is the most powerful thing, right? If you're looking at a building very far away, and like I'm trying to look and identify the detail of a single brick, right, which very tiny. I'm trying to see if I can see the lines at all between the bricks. I'm trying to look at the very tiniest thing, and just sitting there, leaving my eye fixated on that one tiny thing for a good few minutes, good few tries. Like I said, at least so you might have to sit there for 10 minutes or 20 minutes to see some greater level of focus. Just gently letting your eye fix on in that point. Like I said, it's far away, it's tiny, it's blurry. You're thinking, there's no way I can see this. And maybe you open your good eye again and look at it. Maybe you can see, oh wait, man, I can see some detail there that I wouldn't expect to see with my poor eye. But then, go back to your poor eye again, and just keep it fixated on that tiny little thing, right? Just fixated, not like trying to strain, but just not moving around, right? Not moving around. It's fixating on that one tiny little point long enough, and tell me if it actually comes into focus at some point. Maybe you sit there for 10, 20 minutes, maybe not quite that long. It might take a minute or two or three. Maybe you're able to get it to come into focus, but your eye eventually just kind of naturally comes into focus, and you can see a bit of the clarity of it. Now, maybe at first it's a little rocky, it's waving in and out, it's getting clearer, and then a little blurry. And like you said, then that's where you really want to kind of like, then you kind of move it around, get it used to being locked in at seeing clearly at that distance or that level of definition, right? So you want to kind of get it locked into that point where it's not like, wow, okay, now I can see everything over there pretty much clearer, right? And then, once you've achieved a little bit greater clarity with that port, and like, open up your good eye and like let them relax, because you might be like, from having it closed, it might be hard to see, right? But once they're adjusted, right, your eyes have dilated properly a little bit. Notice if you are seeing a little bit crisper, better vision with both eyes open. And let me know if you do this and you notice that, right? And like I said, trying to see some thin cables that are hanging down. Like, let me know if you turn your head to the side, does it change the way the blurriness is for something like that, right? Like the thin cables or the door jamb between the door and the side, the side of the wall or whatever. Can you see the dark space that might be probably between them, most likely, unless they're like super tight. But even the way, you probably can see a line, right? See a small line at least. But with your good eye, probably, certainly, maybe you can. But can you do it with your poor eye, right? So there's a few things like this. This is one thing that helped me really see the cables a bit better that were hanging, where they're really blurry, they're hazy. I'm trying to sit there and focus on. I'm trying to focus where the cables kind of converge, they meet together. This is another big thing too, is like a triangle or converging of two objects. Maybe there's, the stem of a lamp is like crossing over to the side at an angle, and there's a picture on the wall, right? It's just like a perfect, it's perfectly vertical or whatever. And there's one thing like this. And you see the corner that's created right at that area where they cross, and it sure is 90-degree angles. But how about this angle is like this? And can you clearly see the sharpness of the angle that is created between those two objects crossing, at like, especially at maybe an acute angle, for instance? Can you see clearly the definition of where they meet? Or is it blurry right there at the very corner? Do you notice some glare right at the very corner? Maybe two objects are against the wall, like there's a picture and there's something crossing over right in front of it at an angle. It's creating an acute angle, or maybe create any angle, and you'll notice whether it's blurry or if it's sharp or not. But specifically, I think with sharp angels, but angles is what I mean to say. So, like especially maybe on a light wall or a white painted wall, right? Maybe you'll notice the light is coming through, it's a bit bright. Can your eyes focus on the object in the foreground to where it's not allowing that glare to come in, right? That's just ideally you're focusing right on the surface of the object. Maybe like you said, the stem of a lamp, maybe it's not like a cord, it's a little thicker, it's maybe like a centimeter or bigger. That's just an example I could think of, here. Maybe you notice you're looking at it through your good eye, it's pretty sharp. You can see the sides of that lamp stem or whatever it is, but then your poor eye, it's pretty blurry. Even to the point where you have some kind of double vision, right? Or you notice that you have the actual lamp stem, and then you have a little bit of something like, a color coming off of it, like as if there's two lamp stems and they're overlapping, right? One of them is not really what you're trying to, the other one is the real object, maybe. The other one is just the other part that's coming off the edge, like the edge of the building. You're looking at the edge of the building and you see a little bit of a glare getting onto the building of the white light. And you don't want to see that. You want to just be able to see the edge of the building clearly and crisp, right? The color and texture of the building without the white light glare seeping in, right? That's because of your eye, right? It's because the eyes aren't totally focused. So like you stare at that very edge of that building, that tiny building far away, you stare at the very edge of it till it gets crisp. Eventually, I think you'll find in many cases, for many people who watch this, you'll find that it does, you can eventually get it a bit crisper if you just stare at one central point, one angle, one edge, right? The very edge of a building, right? Or like I said, it's an object that's underneath a lamp on the table. If it's reflecting light, it's a light object, right? And as you step away from it, does it seem to change shape or elongate because there's glare created? Now try to fixate on it, that tiny little thing. There's a white pebble underneath the lamp on the desk. Now that you're away from it, you see it's kind of got elongated because of some glare, right? Try to use your one eye to focus on it, the very object itself, without letting the glare that's next to it distract you. You're trying to actually focus your eye right on that tiny little pebble or object. Maybe it's a tiny little rock that's white, or some other piece of paper, or whatever it is, and it's reflecting light from the lamp that's just right above it, shining down on the table. Then, if you get away, does it create glare? Does it create glare? If it does, that's what I'm saying. You really want to sit there and focus your eye right on the object itself, trying to see the object in its fullest definition the best you can, right? And it would be very challenging. So if you're myopic, you might not really be able to get, maybe you'll notice that you're actually seeing two of the object, whatever, that's sitting under the lamp at a certain distance. You notice that, wow, it looks like there's two of them. Or the lines in a parking lot, right, at a distance. Maybe you're nearsighted, it's pretty blurry, but you're trying to get it into focus, get into better focus, but still, overall, you see two lines on the painted white line on the parking lot at a distance. And the way it is, the angle you're looking at it at, maybe it's just straight on, there's a line in the parking lot way over there, your good eye can see it clearly, it's just one single white painted line. But your nearsighted eye, it's pretty blurry at first. Maybe you get into more focus doing this technique. I'm talking about you're looking at this little white painted line in a parking lot, several hundred yards away or feet away. It's a good little distance from you, but you can see it, but you can't see it very clearly at all. Maybe you do this central fixation thing. I'm talking about you're looking at this very small thing far away, a small painted line for a parking lot or something like that, just one end of the painted line. Maybe you can see this glare, or maybe you can see double vision of it. Right? You're trying to get that to come together to form the single line that it is, if it is a single line. Now, if it's two painted lines, you don't want it to look like a single. You want that to be, you want it to be what it looks like out of your good eye, or what it should look like, what it is. Right? If you go up to it, is it a single line, or is there two lines there? Of painted line or something like that. If there's two, then obviously that's what hopefully you'd see that at a distance if you get it into focus, right? But if it's just one line, obviously at a distance you're seeing two lines. That's telling you there's some kind of refraction, some kind of glare going on. You want to focus the eye really well on those two lines to get them to converge, ideally, into where they're just one line and you're just seeing the one thing, and ideally with some level of clarity. Right, so this would be the same thing of looking at the lamp stem where I'm seeing some double vision. Right, I want them to converge. So I'm just seeing the one lamp stem, right, with my poor eye, right? Normally it might be hard to do. But look at it through your good eye. See if it does it look clear? Okay, well that's what you want it to look like in that poor eye, right? So these are just a few things right here. Like I said, the central fixation, I would say, is it's not really, I'm probably calling it the wrong term. Somebody watches this video probably, hey, you're totally wrong about that, chew me out over it, whatever. But hopefully you understand what I'm meaning to say. High level concentrated focus, or gazing with the intent to focus, but not straining, with the intent to let your eye lens relax into the right shape and letting it have the time to achieve that motion, because it might seem like it's not happening, but all it takes, bottom line is just especially if you're moving your eye around to look at different things, you really need to stare at just one single point for this, in my experience, to be most effective, to get it to where you can just all of a sudden, wow, I'm able to actually read that. Holy cow, I'm able to see that tiny detail. Wow. I'm able to see that crack in the cement that I just otherwise can't see from a distance, whatever it is, right? So let me know if you try some of this, right? Like, the main thing is giving this time. Like you said, it's not just time over a bunch of sessions, but I mean time during a session. You can't, this ain't something you just do for 5 minutes a day and you achieve clarity. If you have any reasonable, substantial myopia, maybe some people that might apply to them, but for most people, I think they have real myopia, that, you're going to find this takes some practice, takes some time. You're going to have to really identify when you really see the your glare is going away, blurriness is reduced. Now I'm not saying it's going to be a permanent thing. Like you can go do this for a while, get your eyes seem like it's kind of focusing, and then a little later you're looking at it, it's still blurry again, right? But overall, I think you might find that your overall general vision feels improved, right? It feels clearer, especially with both eyes, because even doing this exercise just in your weak eye, right? Improving your weak eye a little bit, make a significant improvement in your overall, vision of both eyes open. Right? So let me know if you try some of these few things and maybe you've noticed any of these improvements I'm talking about. And I encourage you to maybe sharing this with anybody else you know is nearsighted, because I think a lot of them just discount this. We go and you get glasses. I'm not saying to just throw away your glasses, your contacts. I'm not saying that maybe you need them for certain reasons. But I don't know, you have really bad vision, you need them to drive, right? So, you want to have those capabilities, but also have you want to have the personal capability of understanding what you could do to maybe get your eye to work better, right? To work better on this, maybe reduce your prescription, possibly, right? Now, tell me maybe you watch this video and you apply some of this and you see if it works. Maybe it somehow does help you reduce your prescription glasses or contacts. Yeah, that would be very interesting to hear. It'd be very rewarding to hear that. Think that maybe it does help. I'm not claiming to be like a master at vision and all this stuff. There's plenty of other people that have different stuff, but I think it's easy for a lot of people to claim to know about something that they don't definitively really know about, or maybe haven't experienced, or maybe they're putting it too lightly. They're not really expounding on the most key details that make something work. And like in this case, I'm talking about the biggest factor, I think, in the central point is not letting your eye move around. It's hard. It's easy to let your eye move around when you're trying to focus on one tiny, small thing without your eye moving around, without like moving around to look at something else around it, being tempted to try to look around and everything. But no, we're rather looking at a tiny, tiny point and an object that's pretty far away, and just keeping your eye look fixated on that one thing until you actually see some greater level of clarity. That's a big deal, in my opinion, that I think a lot of people trying some of these Bates methods wouldn't really fully understand. That so like I said, this takes practice. Let me know if you watch this video. Certainly appreciate you listening in. If there's some other video, I have a couple of other videos touching on this topic with some other elements and points, and I'm trying to think of some other facts I can think of right now. Like I said, talking about these cables converging and creating sharp angles, right? That's another thing too. And these cables can be very thin, hard to see. Distinguishing those cables. That's something where I use this kind of palming technique. It's only for a few seconds at a time, right? So I do touch on some of these other things in a couple of other videos I have. So I would go back and watch them. Maybe they're at the end of this video. You might see a video or two. Maybe watch that for some different points. But I think I can assure, not like I cannot guarantee anybody any particular outcome, but I think I could be assured that a lot of people who are myopic, if you really try these few things, you'll see some level of improvement, at least some level of improvement, maybe even a breakthrough in actually seeing something clearly out of your myopic eye. So this is Mikey here. Appreciate you listening in. Certainly appreciate you listening to my ramblings. But and certainly appreciate any support. Maybe you come back and check out some other videos. Maybe you want to subscribe. Certainly appreciate that. In the meantime, let's help people get better vision. All right, thanks for listening in. We'll see you in the next video. Have a great one.